That we're in for the long haul, which means we cannot prepare ourselves as though it were a quick campaign. Sadness, anger, and fear will only carry us so far. The strength that sustains this kind of resistance comes from the heart and the spirit. So let us make our homes for now in this chaos. Allow yourself to be in harmony with uncertainty, so that when you are called to action, you will not already be exhausted. Breathe. Feed your body and spirit. Get centered and give thanks for what is good and beautiful. Remember that we are made for play and joy as well as striving. Surround yourself with friends. Those are wise words. Evil is not easily defeated. Although it can be held at bay by cultivating the precious moments of joy, of goodness, and of beauty, the darkness of injustice and of oppression and of despair lie just beyond our purview, waiting to creep back in like shadows that stretch and grow and loom large as the sun drops towards the horizon. Reverend Rebecca Parker writes, "Calmness in the face of evil comes to those who, rather than being frantic to purge it, concentrate their attention on recognizing and resisting its habits." And while we are attentively learning to recognize the habits of evil so that we can responsibly resist them, Angela reminds us that we sometimes need to make our home in the chaos, to be in harmony with uncertainty. Well, that's easier said than done. Generally, we're not all that comfortable with instability and ambiguity. We tend to fear the unknown. In the gap between what is and what is possible, our minds can go to some very dark places. Indeed, if we allow ourselves, we can live in a place neither real nor impossible where all of our worst fears are playing out. And if imagining a worst-case scenario paralyzes us, then it's actually more likely to happen because we have given up our agency, our autonomy, and our power. The power to act, especially in our own self-interest, is not just a human right, because human rights can be denied. It's a human ability. And to exercise our right and ability to power is to do, it's to act, and it is to live. Community organizer Saul Alinsky said, "Power is the very essence, the dynamo of life. It is the power of the heart pumping blood and sustaining life in the body. It is the power of active citizen participation, pulsing upward, providing a unified strength for a common purpose." So the problem really with instability and ambiguity is that it makes us feel powerless. And if power is the essence of life, then a lack of power can begin to feel like a threat to our existence. It's no wonder that people who are regularly and systematically denied power might feel less than human. And it's also not surprising that people who are accustomed to having power resent the idea of letting any of it slip away and are often willing to do just about anything to keep it. Uncertainty, not knowing, is scary. But if we can be honest with ourselves and examine our fears to distinguish the possibilities from the realities, we don't have to waste energy slaying imaginary dragons and can focus our efforts instead on confronting the real ones. I'd like to introduce you to my friend. Okay, well, I don't actually know him personally, but I like his ideas so much that I consider him a friend. Does anybody else do that? Does anybody else have like a favorite poet or a musician or an author or a thinker, a philosopher that you just feel like you know them? They articulate their thoughts so clearly, and that thoughts resonate with you so deeply that you think you know them and you kind of forget that they don't know you. I actually have a little story about that. I ran into somebody when who wrote a book that I like very much and I quote from often. And she lives in Denver, and I lived in Denver at the time, and she attended the seminary that I was attending at the time. And so in her book, there were many references to this common place that we both shared in our experience. And that really heightened my sense of feeling this connection between me and this author. So when I ran into her in a coffee shop one day, and I said, "Hi, Nadia," it took me a second to realize why she was confused. And I realized very quickly that I needed to introduce myself, which I did. But I digress. That's a different friend. This friend right here is the Reverend James Luther Adams. Now, in addition to being a Unitarian minister and a social ethicist, he is one of our faith tradition's most prominent theologians. And there are two ideas of his in particular that stand out as personal favorites of mine. The first one is his definition of the divine. Throughout his writings, James Luther Adams repeatedly refers to God as the divine community-forming power. Man, how cool is that? The divine community-forming power. I think that the reason this sentiment or this articulation resonates so deeply with me is because it places the divine, the greatest of the great, the most powerful and wonderful thing that you can imagine, it places it like squarely in the context of the beloved community. It makes the divine a product of relationality. And not between people and some ethereal or otherworldly being, but between people and people. Between one another. I like to think of God as the energy that's in the room that we create by being here together. It's an energy that's not in here when this room sits cold and empty. Now, author George Kimmick Beach, who was a friend of James Luther Adams and a friend who actually knew him, I think George Kimmick Beach would agree with me in this interpretation of the divine here. He writes, "The divine community-forming power is Adams' simplest definition of God and his most profound. It locates God's creativity in the formation and the healing of communal relationships, and God's judgment in the exclusivity and betrayal of communities." And not to be ignored in this simple and profound definition of God is the word power. The divine community-forming power. And this is precisely why community building and community organizing is such important spiritual work. It's because this is how power is created. Now, power can often have a negative connotation, and it can certainly be misused. Lord Acton is famous for saying, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." However, I think that if we understand power as the ability to act in our own self-interest, then we can begin to see power as something different, as a resource. Often, the type of power that has negative associations swirling around it is power over. And that's not the kind of power that we're looking to create here in community. The power we're looking for when we come together is not power over, but power with. And power with means that everyone who is affected by the outcome of a decision or action has a say in what that action is. It requires some general agreement on how we are going to be with one another. And this is why covenant is so important in our faith tradition. By being a people, by being a community built on covenant, we affirm that we seek power with, not power over. Now, power is a very important concept in community organizing. The original community organizer, Saul Alinsky, created the Industrial Areas Foundation, the IAF, in 1941 to train leaders how to organize their communities and to empower them to effect positive change. And one of Alinsky's proteges, a man by the name of Ed Chambers, used slightly different terminology to describe the difference between power over and power with. But Ed Chambers writes, "The only purpose of our organization is to amass power, but we are not interested in brute power. We are interested in relational power. There is a difference between strength and bullying. Power can afford to be practical, flexible, wise, and patient. Power can administer justice. When you have power, you can afford to be generous. Power moves orderly. It doesn't crush. And the misuse of power sets the seed of its own destruction." Now this is the kind of power that is created in beloved community. Relational power. Power that administers justice. Power that is generous, patient, and wise. It's the kind of power that helps us align our various self-interests, and then together we can begin to move past the chaos of fear and uncertainty. So I mentioned that I have two favorite ideas of James Luther Adams that I wanted to share with you. The first was his articulation of God as the divine community-forming power. My other favorite theological contribution of James Luther Adams are his 5 smooth stones of liberalism. Now, the liberalism he's talking about specifically is religious liberalism, not political liberalism. And as Unitarian Universalists, we belong to a liberal religion, which means that these 5 smooth stones apply to us. Now, each of the stones, or these principles here, could be the subject of an entire sermon on its own. But what I'm going to do is give you the really short and sweet version. Number 1, religious liberalism depends on the principle that revelation is continuous. This one means that we are constantly learning new truths. Number 2, all relations between persons ought ideally to rest on mutual free consent and not on coercion. So here's another reference to our covenantal nature. This smooth stone means that we freely choose to be in relationship with each other. And number 3, religious liberalism affirms the moral obligation to direct one's effort toward the establishment of a just and loving community. This one means that we work for justice, and it means that we do it together. Number 4, we deny the immaculate conception of virtue and affirm the necessity of social incarnation. Now, this one means that we do, in fact, have agency. And that means that we cannot sit idly by and wait for a better world to just happen. If there is to be goodness, if there is to be justice, then we must act to make them so. And number 5, this one's my favorite. Number 5, liberalism holds that the resources, both divine and human, that are available for the achievement of meaningful change justify an attitude of ultimate optimism. Now, this one means that we should find hope in the fact that we have what we need to improve the world. And it's this fifth stone that I'm particularly interested in. Note that it's not a promise that the world will get better, but it is an assurance that we have all the necessary things to do the work. And it gives us permission to feel good about doing good. So what are these resources that are available for the achievement of meaningful change? Well, going back to Angela's snippet from the sermon, she mentioned some of those things. We can find strength in the nourishment of our bodies and our spirits. Gratitude is a resource. Gratitude for the goodness and the joy in our lives. Appreciation of the beauty that surrounds us. We have friends, relationships. We have the beloved community. We have compassion. We have empathy. We have love. And we have anger. I'm going to tell you a story about a time I got angry. I was on a quest for a late night snack one night, and that quest brought me to Taco Cabana. So I approached the counter, and I placed my order. It was $3 and some change for 2 tacos and a drink. It's a pretty good deal. I handed the cashier a $10 bill to pay for my meal. And when I received $1 and some coins back as change, I politely pointed out to the cashier that she had forgotten to include the $5 bill that would have accounted for the proper change for a 10 that I'd paid with. "No, you paid with a 5, she said. "No, I paid with a 10. You owe me $5 more." Well, we repeated that exchange a few times. And as we're doing that, the line behind me is growing longer. And I said, "I'm not moving until you give me my change." And to which she said, "I'll go to the back and count my drawer. If it's over by $5, I'll give you the 5. "Go ahead. I'll wait." At last, I was going to be proven right. I waited 10 minutes at the front of the line, a line of very frustrated people at this point, for the cashier to return. And I was all ready for an apology and a $5 bill. And so I was kind of confused by the smug look on her face as she approached the counter and said, "My drawer was right, so I don't owe you anything." "I want to speak to your manager," I said, to which she replied, "I am the manager." Of course. So there are 2 kinds of anger: hot anger and cold anger. The problem with hot anger is that it's reactive. We are often quick to respond to anything that makes our blood boil. And you see, there's so many metaphors that tie anger and heat. For example, makes my blood boil, hot under the collar, seeing red, more heat than light, blowing off steam. There's definitely a strong correlation between temper and temperature. But there is also cold anger. I'm a basketball player. Anyone who has ever been to a basketball game or seen one on TV has probably seen the big wavy noodle things that look kind of like foam pool toys that opposing teams will wave to try to distract the opposing team when they're shooting free throws, okay? And in addition to those wavy noodle things, people yell right as the shooter is about to shoot their shot, and sometimes it's not uncommon to even have an air horn go off, right? So really good free throw shooters find a way to not let the crowd's methods of distraction affect their shot. The really, really good free throw shooters, the ones who can do it in even the most tense situations, the last few seconds of a game, the game's tied, it's a close game, and they're at the free throw line, and they've got all these distractions around them. The ones who none of that phases them, well, we say that those players have ice in their veins. It's a phrase that we use, or at least we used to, I don't know. And that refers to their ability to remain cool under pressure. Seemingly nothing can bother them or take their focus off the task at hand. Nothing gets them worked up. Nothing makes them hot or makes them reactive. They know how to remain cool. They know how to remain cold. It's cold as ice. Now, what if we were as laser-focused on our justice work as those basketball players are on their free throws? What if we learned how to tune out all of the distractions and the derailments and zero in on one particular task with a very specific and attainable desired outcome? What if we had ice in our veins as we carried out a well-thought and a very carefully crafted plan? That is the power of cold anger. While hot anger gets us to react in unplanned, unpredictable, and generally unproductive ways, cold anger can motivate us to be controlled, calculated, and incredibly effective. Cold anger is also sustainable in a way that hot anger is not. With hot anger, we often burn out from trying to do too much or being so reactive and operating out of control, and that leaves us with nothing left to give, and we reach the end of our fuse. So from time to time, I still go through the possible scenarios of what might have taken place in that back room at the Taco Cabana. Maybe her drawer had been off before my transaction, and my money made up the difference so that when she counted it, the drawer was right because of my unintended contribution. Perhaps she had intentionally stolen from me and was lying about it. I suppose it's possible, that much, that I was wrong. And that I had actually considered paying with a 10, but changed my mind and opted for the 5 at the last second. And it may have been that she counted the drawer, found that I was correct, and then was either too ashamed or too proud to admit that she had made that error. And you know, only she knows, and only she ever will. But when she came back out and declared that her drawer was right, I was angry. And I mean hot angry. Not only had I just been stolen from, I was being called a liar. I had literally been shortchanged, and I was angry at the injustice and frustrated by my powerlessness in that situation. I can only imagine how heightened these feelings of injustice and powerlessness must be when the injustices are identity-based. Like when women are shamed or not taken seriously for reporting sexual assault. Or people of color who are denied housing, loans, or worst of all, when they are assumed to be guilty and dangerous at traffic stops and excessive force and violence is used against them, sometimes resulting in their death. These are far better reasons to get angry than losing $5. When we hear or experience these stories of injustice, we should get angry. But unlike my ineffective venting to that manager who had absolutely zero incentive to resolve that injustice. Instead, we should channel our anger. We turn it from hot to cold and use it as a reminder to keep going, to keep fighting effectively, and to keep doing the work of disrupting evil, despair, and injustice. How? We affirm life. We celebrate the diversity and the complexity of our intersecting identities. We appreciate beauty and goodness. We build relationships. We invest in the beloved community. And we build power with, not power over. And we use that power to take effective action. So this afternoon, there will be an opportunity to learn specific strategies of how to do this effective community organizing. And I invite you to join me and the First Unitarian core organizing team. We have some members here in the front rows. And today we're going to host an introduction to organizing that's put on by Albuquerque Interfaith. Their style of broad-based relational community organizing that they're going to be teaching us about can be used to build relationships right here within the congregation, but it can also be used, the same strategies can be used for us to build relationships between our congregation, First Unitarian, and other organizations in Albuquerque that are committed to doing the work of justice. If that interests you at all, if you're ready to do the work, then please go grab some lunch after the service. Come back here, meet us at 1:30. We're right back here in the sanctuary, or maybe right outside in the foyer. It depends on how many people we get. But I invite you all to join me to begin the work. And now, I ask that you join together in creating the divine community-forming power by singing together hymn number 170 in your gray